These citizens have been waiting for 40 years for a giant hero to save them. But when a regular man arrives, the citizens get disappointed and order his execution. Gulliver is a young man who loves adventures and traveling. During his journey around the world, he stopped at many cities and solved their problems. One such place is the city of Lilliput. One day, the king of Lilliput gathers his citizens to give them some good news. He has found a prophecy which says that a hero named Gulliver will return to help them. About 40 years ago, Gulliver the giant saved them from their sworn enemy, Blefuscu, who tried to burn down the whole city. Blefuscu is planning to invade Lilliput again, and only Gulliver can stop this. Hearing this, all the citizens start to celebrate and make preparations to welcome their hero. They even build a giant gate because they believe Gulliver is a gigantic man who can't pass through a regular gate. Meanwhile, Gulliver is busy in one of his risky adventures. He loves collecting rare objects and steals a precious crown from the palace. The guards threaten to punish him in the worst way possible, but Gulliver doesn't get scared at all. He says goodbye to the guards and jumps down in the sea from the broken window. He returns to his ship and puts the crown with the rest of his collection. Suddenly, he notices a man reaching there in a small boat. He's the messenger sent by a friend in Lilliput. After introducing himself, the messenger pulls out a letter and shares the message. As soon as Gulliver hears that Lilliput is in trouble, he gets ready to travel there. He passes through the giant gate prepared for him and greets the citizens of Lilliput. Everyone seems really shocked to see him and asks who he is. Gulliver gets confused and introduces himself again, but the citizens accuse him of lying. The king steps forward and asks Gulliver where's the giant hero mentioned in the prophecy. Poor Gulliver keeps explaining that he's Gulliver the hero who saved them last time, but the king refuses to believe him and asks him to prove his identity in court. After reaching the court, Gulliver asks his pet mouse, Squeak, to eat away the law book so the trial gets delayed. The city doesn't actually have a court judge or lawyer, so the king plays all the roles by changing costumes. At first, he becomes the judge and starts looking for his law book. Gulliver assumes that the trial will be delayed, but the judge says he doesn't need the law book anyway. The king wants to make a quick judgment without any criteria so he can go home and eat dinner on time. Gulliver gets shocked to see his behavior and requests a chance to speak for himself. He visited this city just a year ago, but it's all different now. Gulliver can't recognize any of the citizens or the king. During his last visit, the current king was just a baby, and his father was ruling the city. But just in a year, how did the baby grow so old to become the ruler? The king doesn't understand whatever Gulliver is saying. He just wants to know why Gulliver is not a giant as mentioned in their history books. He's supposed to be big enough to build walls and monuments single-handedly. The king decides to put Gulliver behind bars for not fulfilling their expectations. Gulliver explains again that he has never been a giant and saved the city while being a normal guy. Moreover, what kind of court is this which doesn't even have any lawyers? Hearing this, the king puts on the lawyer costume and suggests execution of Gulliver. Clearly, the king has no sense of law and does whatever he likes. Gulliver asks about the jury, so the king disguises as the jury and supports the decision. In frustration, Gulliver requests to have a lawyer to defend himself. As he says that, a young girl from the audience comes forward disguised as a lawyer. She states that Gulliver does belong to a family of giants as mentioned in the history books. But due to a childhood illness, Gulliver stopped growing and became a dwarf in his family. Gulliver is impressed by her story and starts playing along. To gain sympathy, he tells everyone how hard life was for him being a dwarf among the giants. He never found clothes of his size or a job to earn a living. Gulliver believes that the girl will help him get rid of the punishment, but she only delays the execution to the next day. Gulliver starts crying and begging for getting imprisoned for life or kicked out of the city, but he doesn't want to be executed. He's even willing to give away all his wealth if his life is spared. No one listens to him and puts him in the prison along with Squeak. The stupid citizens of Lilliput are killing their savior while their enemy, Generalissimo Blefuscu, is planning to invade them. Suddenly, his loyal spies arrive with some important news. They have seen Gulliver returning to Lilliput. Blefuscu thinks it's a good time to take his revenge for the last year, but he's also shocked to hear that Gulliver is not a giant as mentioned in the books. The invasion will be easier, so Blefuscu sends a message to the king of Lilliput, asking him to surrender. Meanwhile, poor Gulliver is locked in prison, and the jailers keep making fun of his small size. As soon as they go for lunch, Gulliver sends Squeak to find an escape. Squeak tries to follow the guards, but the door gets closed before he reaches it. Squeak starts looking for other ways, but a strong aroma distracts him. He reaches the food storage and stares at the huge collection of cheese. He gets busy eating and forgets about his master. Gulliver assumes that Squeak is stuck in some trouble, so he tries to break the prison lock. Unfortunately, instead of the lock, he accidentally breaks his finger. Suddenly, the king arrives to meet him, so Gulliver tries to act normal. He notices that the king is not very clever and can be manipulated easily. Gulliver starts admiring his talents and says that he has never seen a king who can multitask as a judge and a lawyer too. He also admires the prison room and thanks the king for providing such a good place to rest. Gulliver keeps exaggerating and calls his filthy room a luxurious and cozy apartment. The king gets curious and wants to explore the room by himself. He's been a judge and a lawyer but never experienced how it feels being a prisoner. When Gulliver offers him to switch places, the king immediately gets inside the prison and gives away all the dungeon keys. Gulliver takes the keys and starts looking for Squeak, but he runs into the girl who served as his lawyer. She introduces herself as Marcy and claims to be Gulliver's well-wisher. She told the king to execute Gulliver tomorrow so he could get some time to escape. Gulliver still doesn't trust her and continues looking for Squeak. After a while, Squeak arrives holding several food items. Gulliver takes his mouse and they start finding the exit gate. Surprisingly, the dungeon is built in a special way which makes it inescapable. Gulliver gives up and agrees to take help from Marcy. She slightly pushes the wall and it opens the gate to freedom. Meanwhile, the king has finally figured out that he has been manipulated. He orders his guards to catch Gulliver and give him a punishment worse than execution. Moreover, the king announces a prize for anyone who gives the information about Gulliver. The royal guards find him on the streets and rush to catch him. After running all around the town, Gulliver and Marcy reach the harbor where he left his ship. Unfortunately, the royal guards are patrolling there as well. Gulliver can't leave right now anyway because he needs to meet someone. Hearing this, Marcy asks if he wants to meet his friend Freelock because she knows where he lives. Gulliver wonders how Marcy knows his friend, but she refuses to tell the whole truth and asks Gulliver to keep following her. After reaching the valley, Gulliver gets shocked at how so many trees grew here in just a year. He asks Marcy for an explanation, but she advises him to take some rest. It's already getting dark, so they should start looking for sticks to burn. After collecting sticks, they get ready to sleep, but Marcy warns Gulliver of the upcoming snow. He considers it a joke and starts talking about the difficulties he faced in just a day. Marcy keeps staring at the bonfire and remembers about the law in Hwyn Hem's land that forbids burning sticks. This reminds Gulliver about his journey to that land. It was full of talking horses and singing trees. Gulliver was shocked at first, but the horses were really kind, so he made a lot of friends. After telling the story, Gulliver falls asleep, but when he wakes up, the whole forest is covered in snow. Marcy wasn't joking about the unexpected weather. Yesterday was summer, and today it's snowing. Marcy finally explains how it happens. It is a crazy invention of the king that is called the year day. Every week, there's one day that equals 1 year. This made the time in Lilliput go faster than the rest of the world. Instead of 1 year, 40 years have passed in Lilliput. The king did this for Gulliver because he said that he would return to the city after 40 years. The king didn't want to wait that long, so he sped up the time. Now all 4 seasons pass in just a day. That's why the previous king has passed away already, and most of the people who actually met Gulliver are either dead or too old. The young generation learned about Gulliver from stories, so they expected him to be a giant. What was supposed to be a miracle now seems like a disaster, so the citizens want Gulliver to fix it. Poor Gulliver is really confused, and also regrets saying that he will return in 40 years. The only person who can help him right now is Freelock. Gulliver immediately goes to his house, but Freelock has become an old man. Moreover, Marcy is Freelock's daughter. Gulliver introduces himself, but Freelock refuses to recognize him and scolds Marcy for bringing the criminal to his house. Gulliver reminds Freelock of the times they fought together. How can one forget his best friend? Freelock walks away saying that he had no other option. The new king showed a royal decree with a signature that proved that Gulliver must be a giant. Therefore, like everyone else, Freelock had to accept the facts. Gulliver gets angry and questions their friendship. Marcy advises Gulliver to mind his words because he has no idea what Freelock has been through. He kept telling everyone the truth, but they laughed at him. He was arrested, beaten, and humiliated, but he didn't cheat on his friend. He just kept saying that his friend Gulliver will return to fix everything. When Marcy was born, people threatened to arrest her, so Freelock eventually accepted that Gulliver should be a giant. Gulliver feels ashamed of his behavior and starts singing the song he made together with Freelock. Hearing the lyrics, Freelock starts singing along and hugs his best friend. The beautiful moment gets ruined when the royal guards arrive all of a sudden. Freelock tries his best to protect everyone, but the guards are greater in number. They tie up Freelock and take away Gulliver and Marcy for execution. They are taken to the town square, and all the citizens gather to witness the execution of Gulliver and Marcy, and even Squeak, because he also supported his master. The king gives a boring speech, after which he puts on the executor costume to kill Gulliver. The eye holes on the costume aren't in the right place, so the king fails to see clearly. He keeps hitting here and there, so Gulliver gets time to talk to Marcy. He has already guessed that Marcy was the one who invited him through a letter, because Freelock wasn't in his senses. She believed Gulliver when no one did. Even if he dies, Gulliver doesn't regret coming, because otherwise he wouldn't have met a lovely girl like Marcy. The king gets really frustrated and throws away the costume. The execution gets interrupted anyway because a special guest has arrived to meet the king. It's the officers sent by Blefuscu, and they want the king of Lilliput to surrender. Otherwise, Blefuscu will use his mighty army to take over the city. The king doesn't want to bow down so easily, so he tells the officers that their giant hero has arrived now. The officers take this message back to Blefuscu, but he isn't afraid and orders the army to proceed towards Lilliput. Meanwhile, the king invites Gulliver to a luxurious brunch and asks him a favor. He wants Gulliver's help in defeating the mighty army of Blefuscu. In return, the king is ready to do anything Gulliver wants. Hearing this, Gulliver agrees to the deal. He wants his friends to be released and the decree to be rewritten. The king must announce that Gulliver is the real hero they had been waiting for. The king is ready to do everything Gulliver asks. He starts by releasing Squeak and Marcy, and then announcing Gulliver's arrival in town. He's declared the giant everyone was waiting for, but the citizens refuse to believe that. They demand Gulliver to fulfill all the prophecies made about the legendary giant. It includes fixing the city's water supply and the broken guarding wall. Freelock advises Gulliver to fulfill the prophecies if he wants to prove himself a hero. Gulliver agrees and start planning the reconstruction of the wall. After completing this task, he takes Freelock's help in exploding the dam with gunpowder that brings the water back to the city. After proving himself, Gulliver gathers the citizens and explains that all what he did would be impossible if the citizens hadn't helped him. Lilliput doesn't need a giant if the citizens keep working together like this. A giant is not someone with a giant body, but a real giant is the one with a big heart and good deeds. Everyone can be a giant if he gains courage to do big things. Gulliver's speech changes the mindset of the citizens, and they start cheering for him. Once peace returns to the city, Gulliver finds a chance to talk to Marcy. She apologizes again for dragging him into this mess, but Gulliver doesn't seem to regret it. He is glad to meet Freelock and his lovely daughter. Gulliver grabs a flower to confess his love to Marcy, but they get interrupted by the royal guards. Blefuscu's army has arrived to invade the city. Gulliver asks the king to guide the soldiers in this war, but the king runs away to protect himself. Seeing this, Gulliver takes the charge and asks the soldiers to go back to their posts. As it gets dark, the citizens get more afraid and start escaping Lilliput. Most of the soldiers run away too, and the army is short on weapons. There's no way Lilliput can defeat Blefuscu in a war. Gulliver and Freelock must plan together like the old days. Once Blefuscu's army arrives at the gate, Freelock announces that Gulliver wants to spare their lives if they agree to a deal. Blefuscu gets curious and accepts the offer. Gulliver walks out of the gate and introduces himself. Blefuscu starts laughing at his size, but Gulliver claims to have secret powers and magical skills. He challenges Blefuscu to a duel, and the winner will keep Lilliput. Moreover, if Blefuscu wins, it will be written in history that he defeated Gulliver the Giant. Blefuscu falls for the trap and agrees to fight Gulliver. The next morning, they arrive at the battlefield and grab swords to fight. Gulliver uses his intelligence and takes advantage of the surroundings to distract Blefuscu. Eventually, Blefuscu drops his sword and accepts his defeat. Gulliver starts celebrating his victory, and he doesn't notice the trick Blefuscu is hiding under his sleeves. He puts on a metal armor and starts beating up poor Gulliver. Suddenly, the sky gets cloudy because the year day has started. Freelock uses the speaker to create a deep voice while Gulliver pretends to control the weather. The sudden rain and snow destroys Blefuscu's armor, and he runs away thinking that Gulliver is a powerful magician. Once the danger is gone, the king appears to take all the credit. However, the citizens will not fall for his lies anymore. They want a better leader, so they choose Gulliver. But Gulliver believes there's someone more deserving than him. Freelock should be the king because he fought the lies alone for years. Freelock accepts this honor and promises to get rid of Year Day. Gulliver finally gets a chance to confess his love to Marcy and takes her on an adventure to see the world.